Hello, this is going to be Chapter 9 for Introduction to Business to make up the class. I think it was March 28th. Again, it's just going to be a YouTube video so that we can go through the material, mostly just a lecture that goes along with the slides. I'm working with Bunker Hill to try to figure out how to do a live class, hopefully as soon as this weekend. So we should be able to start resuming a little bit more, normal in terms of time frame. Hopefully we can run the class live. If I can't do that, I'll just continue to do recorded versions of it so that you can stay up to date. Chapter 9 is on motivating the workforce. If you take a look at slide 2, the nature of human relations, it's basically the study of behavior and the way people as individuals and groups work together in organizations. Human relations also includes motivating people. People who are motivated will be committed to the task that they're trying to do, and it will help them work more efficiently and effectively, meaning that they will perform the task that they need to do, which is effectiveness, but they will also complete it with the least amount of resources necessary, or oversight in that case, which would increase the profitability of the organization if they act more efficiently. Motivation is an inner drive, which can be impacted by intrinsic, meaning internal motivation factors, intrinsic motivation, which is driven by internal factors, as well as extrinsic motivation factors, motivation that comes from external to your personality. People are motivated by trying to satisfy some kind of a need. If they have a goal, if they have an objective to achieve, they will seek out the means to be able to complete it. They will take action in order to get there, and then the motivation will lead them to success eventually. In the business sense, that is typically in the simplest setting. You want to get a promotion, you'll learn how to do the work. If you want to get more money, you'll be able to get a promotion. There has to be something that drives people to do it. It can be intrinsic, like I said, something that drives you internally because you just want to do a good job, but it could also be for external or extrinsic factors that makes you want to be able to achieve something. If you don't have any motivation, there's not a lot of reason to do the work. Slide 3 talks about motivation that can be provided by companies by providing benefits of certain types. The example that they give on slide 3 is to provide on-site daycare. This is not particularly common, especially in smaller businesses, but larger companies can have things like daycare. Just like anything else in business, if you buy things in bulk, you can get a cheaper price for it. So as an individual trying to get daycare, you'll have to pay a higher fee than an organization that could arrange for daycare for 20 or 30 of its employees. They can then pass that savings along to their employees. It may actually benefit them to the extent that they'd be willing to take less money, so it's kind of a wash. If you have on-site daycare, you can take your kids to work. It makes your job a little bit easier. And because your company is providing that kind of a benefit, of course, daycare is just one example, then you may want to work harder and be more committed to the organization and stay there. These kind of benefits make employees more satisfied. And if they're satisfied, it may lead to more motivation and commitment to the company. If they're committed to the company, they'll be less likely to leave. And if you have a good employee that doesn't leave, that means you can avoid the costs of turnover, where you have to train new people constantly to come in and backfill positions that have been vacant. Slide 4 talks about motivating the workforce. Human relations is really looking at what the employees want, what their goals are, what they need to do to try to achieve them, and hopefully providing some type of a positive feedback loop so that they can see that the actions that they're taking are being rewarded. Motivated employees remain engaged and they remain committed to doing their job. It also helps create emotional involvement and helps employees look at their expectations and satisfy them. Slide 5 talks about one way that you could motivate people who work for you, and here's the example of David Lee Roth. A lot of you probably aren't familiar with him, but he was the lead singer for a band called Van Halen in the 1970s and 80s. When bands would go on the road, and still do, they get contracts for the venues that they perform at. Included in the contracts are what is known as riders, which are specific details that they want provided to them. What kind of dressing room you want, what kind of food you have to have, what type of technical equipment needs to be available so that your road crew can get in there and install the stage and the light system and the PA. One of the things that they included in their rider was a request that in addition to the food that they wanted in their dressing room, they also wanted a bowl of M&Ms with all of the brown M&Ms removed. People heard that and they thought, well, he's just an eccentric rock star. They don't really take him very seriously. But later on, he kind of explained why that was something that he thought was important. Roth figured that if the managers that he was working with wouldn't take care for something as simple as providing him a bowl of M&Ms, then they might have failed at the other things, which were far more important. And he could use that as an example to show that they weren't doing their job correctly. There's a lot of safety issues that are involved with rigging a stage. If you make a small mistake, you may make bigger mistakes that could be threatening to the show and the livelihood of the production, but it could also be a safety and health hazard as well. So he used that as a way to kind of prove that the managers were doing their job. And if they weren't, he could use that as leverage to get them to correct any mistakes that were being done. Slide 6 is a graphical representation that shows how motivation plays out. An employee, or anyone for that matter, could see that there is a need that they need to fulfill. They change their behavior in an effort to fill that need, and then they take action in order to satisfy that need. And then they move on to the next thing that they're looking for. So if you have a job and you want to get a promotion, you go to school, you get the education, you talk to the management, and you figure out what they're looking for, and then you take the steps to be able to fulfill those requirements in order to get the promotion. Part of motivation is related to morale. Morale is an employee's attitude regarding how he considers his employer, the job that he has, his fellow employees. Morale can often be managed by things like reward systems, just a pat on the back, telling somebody they did a good job. There could be formal reward structures or recognition, employee of the month, some type of a bonus system, anything that can give people recognition for the work that they do. And then if it's seen as a kind of a big deal, I'd like to be employee of the month, I guess. What do I need to do to get there? That can give an incentive to people to be able to work a little bit more efficiently, a little more effectively, so that they can achieve the recognition that they're seeking. If you can facilitate higher morale, there is a connection to that. It is correlated to higher levels of productivity. I know the slide says high levels, but it doesn't necessarily lead to as much productivity as you might think. It is definitely positively correlated with higher productivity, but it's not necessarily a panacea to get you great performance. Employees with high morale also work better. They deal with their customers better. They deal with their stakeholders better. They deal with their employees and the management better. That results in higher returns to investors and stakeholders in the organization. It can also foster employee loyalty, which means they'll be more committed to the organization. And again, you can avoid those turnover costs. Low morale can lead to disenchantment with the organization, a low level of commitment. People with low morale don't like their job necessarily because they're not happy with the feedback that they're getting. This can lead to high rates of absenteeism, people calling in sick quite frequently. They take as much vacation as they can. They might come in late. They might leave early. They may loaf on the job. That is an expense because when people call in sick, nobody else is there to do their job. And as the slide notes, it can be about a third of the cost of payroll is spent just paying people to not show up. And absenteeism is much higher among those with low morale. So if you can get people with higher morale, they will show up, they'll do their job, and the company won't lose as much money. Low morale also leads to high turnover rates, which means that if you have a good employee who's unsatisfied, they may be inclined to look elsewhere for a job. And if they leave, that job will have to be backfilled, meaning you'll have to hire someone, you'll have to take time and resources to train them. They won't be very productive until they get trained. And again, if they end up with low morale, they may leave and you end up in this cycle of constantly replacing people, which definitely adds to the expense of the company. Rewards can be used to increase morale. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are intrinsic rewards. These are things that are kind of driven by the personality of the employee. If you feel good because you did a job and no other reason, then you have intrinsic motivation. You want to do something like a home project, you want to paint the house, you want to do something, you just feel a sense of satisfaction when you complete it. You get that on your own. The example that they give is school. If you come to class and you learn a few things, you may feel better about yourself, and that is the reward for participating. The extrinsic rewards are what comes from outside factors. You can get benefits and pay, you can get rewards, you can get bonuses, you can be told you're doing a good job, you can be recognized for the work that you're doing. In the class, for the example that they gave, if you get a good grade in the class, that would be the extrinsic reward that justified the effort that you made in order to do the work to get that type of grade. On slide 10, they list a bunch of morale boosters. When people are treated with respect, they tend to react positively. If they're appreciated at their job, if they get promotions, if they're involved in the work that they're doing instead of simply being told what to do, they feel more empowered. They feel more a part of what the company is trying to accomplish. If you have a positive organizational culture that does recognize success and reward it, people feel better about the company that they're working for, and it may incentivize them to continue to work hard. If they're paid appropriately, they don't have to be paid at a superstar level because that may not be financially feasible. But as long as they are paid at a level that they believe is equitable, meaning fair, then that should lead to satisfaction and that can keep the morale at an adequate level. A pleasant work environment leads to morale. People spend a lot of time at work, a couple of thousand hours a year. You probably spend more time working than you do doing anything else. As long as that place that you're going to do the work provides you with a decent atmosphere, then it's something that you would be not disinclined to participate in. At the bottom of slide 10, they talk about things that you can do to retain good employees. And again, retention is important. If you have a good employee, you do not want them to leave. You want to be able to take advantage of their commitment and their contribution to the objectives and the mission of the company. Employees should be challenged. You should give them work that is not necessarily something that can be done by rote memorization. Employees typically don't want to feel like they're a cog in a machine, but they should not be given work that is so hard that they can't actually complete it. It should be enough to keep it interesting. It should be enough to challenge them, but you shouldn't give them work that they cannot possibly do. That would lead to actually low morale because it feels like it's something that they become overwhelmed with, and then when they can't do it, they feel like a failure. So that could have the opposite effect. You need to provide adequate incentives, either in pay, reward structures, bonuses, promotions, etc. Managers should try not to micromanage. Again, if you're talking about employee empowerment, they don't necessarily want to be told what to do every moment of the day. Typically, managers who micromanage don't have the training or the experience in what it means to manage people. Oftentimes, managers who get promoted because they were good performers as a line worker don't necessarily have the skill set required to be able to teach people and to train people and to coach people to be able to do the jobs themselves. And often what they do is, if they were star performers where they were, they want everybody to do the job the same way that they did it. So you've got somebody looking over their shoulder telling you how to do it the way that they did it. There could be dozens of ways to complete a particular task, and there may not be one way that is particularly better than the others. But if you have a manager that believes that there's only one way, their way, to do the job, then they will be constantly looking over your shoulder and telling you how to do it. That can definitely lead to low morale. Managers should strive to create a work-friendly environment. We'll talk about the things that can be done to help alleviate some of the stress on workers through things like flex time, certain benefit programs that can be available to people, but it's also just treating people with the respect that they deserve for the jobs that they're doing. If you're a manager of an organization, all of the work that is being done is by your employees. They're the ones that are making the money for the company. They're the ones that are providing the services. They're the ones who are making the product. A manager's job is to simply make sure that they have the resources necessary to complete that. So if you treat the people who are actually doing the work with the respect that they deserve, people will respond positively to that. There should also be opportunities for employee growth. I've been in jobs where there wasn't really any kind of a career track. The only way that I could get promoted was to leave, and that's exactly what I did. Other places where they give you the opportunity to move up, you will work with that incentive in mind, and you'll perform at a high level with the expectation that you would be able to get that payoff. And if it comes, then that definitely increases employee commitment to the organization. Slide 10 talks about Costco as an example of what they can do to keep their employees happy, keep morale high, and keep them satisfied and boost morale. The things that they do, obviously paying them a higher rate than average is a good idea. If you can pay more money, you'll probably attract better employees. If you pay somebody $20 an hour, if they work and produce $30 in revenue for you, that would be better than paying somebody $15 an hour who brings in $10. So you can attract better employees who may work more efficiently, and it alleviates the expense that it actually takes to keep them employed there at the higher rate. They give a lot of vacation, they match their 401k retirement contributions, they give health insurance, which a lot of companies like Costco do not do for their rank and file employees. Costco also made sure they gave raises even though there was a downturn in the recession. That's not an easy thing to do for management because they still have to pay the bills and they have to make sure that their investors get the return in the form of dividends. But if you properly manage your expense accounts, you should be able to weather the storm even in a bad economic situation and keep your employees satisfied. That also means that when the recession ends, if you can keep your employees working there, you'll be in a position to be able to take advantage of when the economy gets better because you won't need to hire new employees to scale up you'll still have the employees that you have. Slide 12 just gives 10 examples of things that you can do. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll touch upon a couple of them. Equitably dispense rewards and other incentives. Again, equity in a business sense can mean ownership. So if you buy stock in a company, you have an equitable share because you own part of it. Equity in this sense simply means fairness, to treat people equally. If one person does a good job and another person does a good job, but only one gets a raise or only one gets recognition, the employees will notice. And if it's unequitably distribution of rewards and incentives, then there will be a lack of morale for those who feel that they're being shortchanged. Positive and negative feedback, as well as constructive criticism, is important. We'll talk in a few slides later about how to use positive and negative reinforcement. If you can keep things positive, it's usually the better way to go. People don't like to be told that they're doing a terrible job over and over. Some managers focus and fixate on only looking at things that are going wrong, and they're very stingy with giving praise. Constructive criticism is kind of a combination, or at least an alleviation of the impact of a negative comment or evaluation. Constructive criticism means that I look at something that you're not doing particularly well, but instead of simply berating you for it, I give you the tools to be able to improve, and I work with you to make sure that you can achieve the level of performance that we're looking for. If you treat your employees like they're partners, again, they feel empowered. They feel like the company is their company instead of just someplace that they go to pick up a paycheck. If you're working at a fast food restaurant and you're getting paid by the hour, great. You can pay the rent maybe, but how much work would you have an incentive to do? If you work for a place, even if it's a fast food restaurant, they're not paying you a great amount, but the job is interesting and the ideas that you come up with are implemented, you may feel more inclined to stay and have a positive commitment to the organization. Slide 13 goes over some of the historic ways that businesses have been analyzed from a scientific perspective. It wasn't until really in the 20th century when, after the Industrial Revolution, that a lot of companies began working in industry where you had, for the first time in human history, a lot of people working together. People began to study it from an academic and a scientific way to find out how they could make people more productive. And what they did is they looked at people to find out what types of factors contributed to increased productivity. Slide 14 talks about the classical theory of motivation, and when we mean classical, we mean old, basically. It's kind of an outdated viewpoint. What they would do is they would break down jobs to their most basic points. We talked about specialization, I believe, in Chapter 7, and it still does make sense to do that. However, if you break down the job to a very simple components, and that's all you give your employees, you don't give them any other tasks to do, they can get bored and be disincentivized to work hard. The classical theory would also mean that you would try to figure out the best way to perform the task, train people, ask for the performance, and then measure how well they did through an evaluation process. They would then provide incentives to see how people could become more productive, and they really just focused on pay. If you were in manufacturing and you created some type of a product, they would come up with a figure. If you make 30 a day, you get paid this much. If you make 40 a day, you get paid that much. This piecemeal way of paying people does provide a motivation and an incentive to create more output, but you have to be careful about unintended consequences, because if I tell someone I'll pay you a certain amount to make 30 of one thing, and then I'll pay you more if you make 50, you may make 50, but you may take shortcuts in order to do it, and the quality could suffer, and then our customers would get an inferior product. The Hawthorne studies on slide 15 were done in the 1920s and 30s, and they came up with a hypothesis. The hypothesis was that if we improve the physical conditions, the study was conducted at a Hawthorne works plant, so it was called the Hawthorne effect. They tried to figure out if people would work better and be more productive if their work environment was improved. What they really ended up finding, though, probably to the surprise of the people who came up with the hypothesis, is that psychological factors, interpersonal factors, had a bigger effect than the physical workplace in terms of output, productivity, and morale. On slide 16, what they found when they did the Hawthorne studies over a period of 8 years is they had people working in different conditions and they measured their output. When they asked employees what made them satisfied, the ones who were the most satisfied were basically the ones who said that their coworkers were friendly, they were easy to get along with, the supervisors asked for input, they validated their input, they made them feel like they were involved in what was going on. And the employees also said that they really had a strong response to the attention that they got. And it really wasn't the work conditions. Nobody wants to work, in a dungeon and do terrible work and have a terrible work condition. But if everything else was okay, most people can tolerate work conditions that are not particularly pleasant. You could have the most beautiful place in the world to work, but if you have a boss that's on your back all the time, if you have employees that are petty and they don't treat you with respect, it really isn't going to matter. It really comes down to the psychological factors. And they did find that it had a positive correlation on productivity and morale. On slide 17, the experiments basically found that human factors are very important in terms of worker behavior and worker productivity. If you have managers who understand what people need, what their beliefs are, what their expectations are, and then they give them the capacity to fulfill those expectations equitably, motivation increases, as does output. The example that they give here is one that I personally am not a fan of because I'm a lawyer. Some companies do let people bring their pets to work. I suppose that's great. From my perspective, I've got people with dog allergies or phobias. It's maybe not the best way to do it. You have a dog that has an accident on the rug. I don't know how well that's going to treat morale for people who don't like dogs, but it is something that can be done. There are a lot of other things that you can do, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. On slide 18, there's a graph that basically demonstrates what types of things, other than salary, is really tied to job satisfaction. It's kind of funny because the third category right in the middle of the graph is compensation and pay, so I'm not sure how that is aside from salary. But the opportunities to use your skills and abilities, that's the highest level of job satisfaction. People who work in a place where they can exercise the skills that they have, do what they were trained to do what they like to do, that gives them the highest level of job satisfaction. Job security is a close second, so if you work for a place that is committed to keeping their employees even through recessions and economic downturns, people will be more committed because they don't have to worry about losing their job, and then they don't have to worry about providing for their family. If you work for a place that every time there's a hiccup in the economy, they lay off 10 or 20% of their staff, that's going to lower morale and make it difficult for people to feel comfortable. Compensation and pay comes in at 60%. I think the thing that should be considered here is that even though it does say aside from salary, the compensation and pay is probably tied a little bit to the equitable compensation and pay, meaning if I think I'm getting paid what I should be getting paid compared to my peers, then I should be okay. I should be happy with that. If I'm working hard and I'm not being paid as much as people who don't work as hard, that could lead to dissatisfaction. So rather than talking about the amount of money I'm getting paid from a subjective perspective, it really may come down to fairness. So as long as I'm being paid fairly, I think that's what that middle column is really getting at. Communication is at 57%, and that's between employees and senior management. Communication is very important. When you don't communicate with people, they don't know what you want, they don't know what the expectations are. And often if you don't share information with them, there becomes an information vacuum, and people often fill that in with something, probably not accurate information. The lack of information can also lead to fear. So if there's an economic downturn and we're not hearing anything about what the company's going to do to address it, people may just assume that there's going to be a layoff. Companies that are honest with their employees and they communicate what's happening, yes, there's an economic downturn, this is what we're going to do. You may not be happy with it, but at least you are aware of what's going on. It's often said that people join a company or they accept an offer to join a company because of the nature of the company, the type of company that it is and the work that they do, and they end up leaving because of their boss. So at 54%, the relationship with the immediate supervisor is definitely connected to satisfaction. A lot of people who like their boss would be inclined to stay. If you don't like your boss, that may be the first thing that leads to a cascade of reasons for you to start thinking about why you might want to leave. Slide 19 is this lollipop graph that basically shows all these other things that we're going to be looking at in terms of theories of employee motivation. So I'm not going to go through them here. You can take a peek at it. We'll go through them in detail in the upcoming slides. On 20, they talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A hierarchy, if you remember from our earlier discussion about organizational charts, the people at the top are at the top of the hierarchy. It's basically levels of authority. Hierarchy in this sense kind of means that as well. At the low level, you need the basics that you have to get. And then as you go higher and higher on the hierarchy, you can build on the foundation and be able to do some other things that are important to you. What we're looking at is the 5 basic needs: physiological, security, social, esteem, and self-actualization. At the bottom, the foundation. If you're going to build a house, you need to build the foundation first. What you need is physiological needs to be met. You need to feel safe. You need to make sure that you have a roof over your head. Then you have to be secure. You have to make sure that you're not in danger, that you have health care, that you can take care of your family if it need be. You have social needs. You have to have friends. You have to have interaction with your employees. These can lead to feeling better about yourself, and eventually you can go to school, you can pick up a hobby, you can do things that interest you. That can lead to self-actualization. Without the bottom of the pyramid, the top of the pyramid is not possible. Slide 21, I'll probably just talked over most of this, but again, it gives you a breakdown of all of the 5 hierarchical needs pointed out by Maslow. So again, the physiological needs, the basic things you need. If you have a job that pays you enough, you'll have a place to live, you'll have access to food, water, etc. Security needs, you have to make sure that you're in a safe place. Social needs, love, companionship, friendship. It's hard to have that if you're living out in the street and you don't have any place to go and you're not secure. Once you have all of those things, then you can start building self-respect and respect for others. And then self-actualization needs refers to being the best person that you can be, becoming a complete person. And again, that can't happen without all of the others. If you are a manager and you have an employee that doesn't feel safe, or you have a job that isolates them socially, it's going to be hard for them to have the self-esteem that could lead to good motivation. Slide 22, this is Hertzberg, another person who did some psychological reviews and studies. There's a 2-factor theory here. He thought these things were quite important. He talks about hygiene. This is not like taking a shower hygiene. This is other factors regarding work setting, just the things you kind of need to get by. So adequate wages, comfortable and safe working conditions, fair company policies, and job security. It's pretty similar to what Maslow was talking about. He just basically referred to the bottom of the pyramid as hygiene, the things that you have to be able to perform. Then the motivational factors are in addition to that. You need to have the hygiene in place, and then you can be motivated in order to retain the hygiene elements. But it's also based on the work itself. If you have interesting work, that'll motivate you. If you have the possibility to achieve, get recognition, be involved, have responsibility and advancement. A lot of these are the same topics that we've already discussed, but he was just viewing it through a different construct. Slide 23, they talk about hygiene factors. These are the company policies, the type of supervision you get, working conditions, relationships that you have, your salary, whether you're secure in terms of job security or whether you feel safe at work. All of these are basic things that you need to have provided to you. Hygiene. Motivational factors, this is the ability to achievement, recognition, the work that you're doing, what kind of responsibility you get, that you can make decisions, that you have an impact on others, whether you can get promotion and whether you can get training and be able to get more personal growth. And as the bullets point out, salary and security satisfy the bottom of the Maslow pyramid, and then Hertzberg's motivational factors leads to the higher ends. So as I said before, they're pretty similar, they just looked at it slightly differently. On slide 24, they talk about customer-centric processes. Making your employees focus on customer satisfaction can actually be a motivator. They look at 2 hotels here, one is Hilton, one is Marriott. Hotels are really customer service oriented. If you have a bad experience, you're very unlikely to go back. If you have a good experience and you're a person who travels, you'll tend to go to the same places over and over again throughout the country or even throughout the world. So they created a committee for all of its locations, and the employees from everywhere throughout the organization have to work together to find out how to make customers as happy as possible. Whether it's the check-in process, if it's too slow, the people who do that job are the ones that actually know the most about it. They can contribute new ideas to be able to make it a little bit better. And if customer satisfaction goes up through things like surveys and feedback, then you can give a reward to the people who are involved, and that creates, again, an incentive and a motivation to achieve. Marriott, the people actually leave notes for guests. They have a loyalty program where if you continue to go back to Marriott, they'll give you a discount, they'll give you special perks. These are things that the employees have to be able to pull off. And if they do a good job on it, that can lead to a sense of self-worth and success, which can lead to better morale. Slide 25, we're talking about McGregor, who's another person who took a look at motivation and job performance. Theory X is kind of a traditional view, the classic view in the older days. The average person is viewed as somebody who dislikes work, wants to avoid it whenever possible. The modern view is going to be in contrast to that, because if you've gone to school, you've picked a field that you're interested in, you're doing the job because you want to do that job. So it kind of runs in conflict to have a boss that thinks that you're only there for a paycheck. The Theory X would also believe that most workers have to be corrected, controlled, directed, threatened with punishment. You basically have to be a slave driver to get people to do what they want in terms of output. They also assume that the average worker wants to be directed. They don't want to have responsibility. And really all they want is job security and a paycheck. So the style of management is kind of outdated. It focuses on physiological and security needs at the bottom, but it ignores all those other things related to motivation at the higher end of the Maslow hierarchy. Theory Y is a humanistic, more modern view of management. Theory Y managers, they don't have as much control or supervision. They're less likely to be micromanagers. They don't use fear as a way to get the job done. Do the job or I'm going to fire you, or you're going to get docked a day's pay, and constantly criticizing people. They're more democratic. They get input regarding employee opinions before they make decisions about doing things. And they allow people to participate and empower them in the job. This is, again, more of a modern way of conducting management. Slide 27 talks about Theory Y and the assumptions that it makes. I won't go through all of them, but I'll highlight a couple. If you have employees that understand that they have a path to success and then they're rewarded for it, they'll know that those achievements are something that they can do to get a personal reward. The average person really does want to work. They want to have responsibility. They want to be successful. You can take advantage of that, not in a negative sense, but if you're going to exploit someone, exploiting them for something that they want to do is far better than exploiting them for something that they don't. Focusing on your employees and their imagination, their creativity, you can get input from employees that can solve a lot of problems that management cannot do on its own. Slide 28 talks about Theory Z, which is really something that is a little bit of a combination of Theory Y, not so much Theory X, but it comes from a Japanese approach in the 1980s and 90s, specifically with Motorola and companies like Toyota. They were really focused on total quality management. That was really something that they relied on employees to do. So they would charge employees with the task of figuring out how to do things better. How do we make products with higher quality? The people who are putting the products together are the ones who know the most about it. So again, getting their input has a dual effect. You get better products if you listen to your employees about how to make them better, and the employees feel better about their input because they know that their work is valued. Slide 29 talks about the comparison between American, Japanese, and Theory Z management styles. I won't go through all of them, but the American and Western cultures are a little bit different than Japanese and Asian cultures. Asian cultures, if you take an organizational development and behavior class, they'll talk about things like more of a community sense, a longer-term view. They work more for others than for themselves, whereas Western cultures tend to be much more individualistic and short-term in terms of quick profit. So if you look at the duration of employment, there's a lot of turnover in American factories, whereas in Japanese you have lifelong employment and very few layoffs. In Theory Z, it's a little bit of a combination. Long-term, you may have some layoffs, but it's kind of a combination of the two. Rate of promotion in America is fast. It's slow in Japan, slow under Theory Z. Decision-making in America is individual. In Japan, it's more consensual. In Theory Z, because the emphasis was on quality to begin with the total quality management theories that they employed, it's a little bit of a combination. Slide 30 also talks about some hybrid usage of Theory Z. So in America, where we don't really focus on the total quality management that the Japanese companies might have focused on, they did come up with things like quality circles, where we have 5 to 8 members of employees who work kind of in the same vein that the Japanese counterparts would. They would try to reduce waste, improve quality, communication, and satisfaction with work. They actually call it participative management or employee involvement. This is really related to getting people involved in the work. If employees have more control over what they're doing, they'll feel more responsible, they'll take ownership of the job. If you have employees like that too, it makes management a lot simpler. If you facilitate an environment where people want to work, you're not going to have to look over their shoulder. You're not going to have to be a micromanager. So it makes the job of being a manager easier. Slide 31 talks about equity theory. Again, equity in this context means fairness. People often look at their peers in order to determine whether they're being treated fairly. Equity in this sense is a subjective notion. We talked about this in critical thinking, the difference between objective and subjective. Objective is fact, subjective is opinion. Whether or not you think you're being treated fairly is subjective. So again, equity is a subjective notion. If you think you're being treated fairly or you're being paid an appropriate wage, that is something that you'll pay attention to. And you will inevitably make a comparison to others to find out if you're getting what you think you deserve. Equity theory also is related to CEO compensation. This has been in the news a lot. 50 years ago or so, the average CEO of a corporation made between 20 and 30 times what the average employee made. Today, there are some organizations where the CEO makes between 1,500 and 2,000 times as much. So employees who work for a corporation, you have to work 1,000 years to make 1 year worth of pay. For the CEO, they may think that it's an unfair distribution of resources when compared to the amount of work that each party is doing. So feelings of inequity can really lead to a loss of morale, dissatisfaction with the job, and a lack of employee commitment to the organization. Slide 32 is kind of expanding on this theory of equity. It looks at personal input and output ratio. A ratio is simply taking one number and dividing it into another. So if you look at how much work I've done versus how much I'm paid, I can come up with a ratio. If I look at how much my colleague is working and how much they get paid, I can then compare what we're getting for the work that we're putting in. And if I believe that I'm being treated unfairly or inequitably, that could be demotivating. Slide 33 is a further expansion of this issue. When you're talking about expectations, when you do the work and you expect to have an outcome and you don't get that outcome, then your expectation has been kind of undermined. So if you want something and you're optimistic that you'll get it because there's been proof through other employees who have done similar work before and they've received those rewards, then there will be an incentive for you to work harder in order to get it. If you work hard and don't get it, again, that can be demotivating and hurt morale. And if you work for a place where everybody works hard and nobody gets anything, you're going to be in a bad situation fairly quickly. Slide 34 just gives you a quick example of how motivation works. If you want something, there's your need. Going back to the slide we talked about earlier in this chapter, you may take action in order to be qualified to get that. Take night classes, improve your skills, you do better work, you make a big sale, you do a good project. You start to feel confident that you're qualified for it, and then you're motivated to continue to do that type of work, especially if you see others around you getting promoted. And if you get that reaction and you do get a promotion, then you'll move on to the next thing and continue to work hard. Slide 35 talks about positive reinforcement. If you're recognized for your good work, you're more likely to continue to keep putting out that type of effort in order to continue to do good work. Positive reinforcement is effective because it really gives you an immediate response. If you've done a good job, you're told you've done a good job, you get that reward signal in your brain and you continue to work hard. Even employees who are not naturally or intrinsically motivated can respond positively to positive feedback and positive reinforcement. Slide 36 talks about using behavior modification techniques. Again, if you reward behavior that is desirable, it's probably going to be repeated. If you have a negative performance and you punish it, it's probably going to be eliminated. However, as common sense as that sounds, typically punishing unacceptable behavior can give you a quick turnaround, but it's not necessarily the long-term solution. We talked about constructive criticism a couple of slides back. If somebody's doing a bad job, you need to point it out, but you don't need to be necessarily negative or have really punitive consequences for that behavior. You need to give them the tools to be able to improve in order to correct that behavior. If you reward appropriate behavior and sometimes even ignore negative behavior, that can have a more positive outcome. This is not to be confused with really bad behavior like bullying or sexual assault or something. Sexual harassment taking place needs to be addressed with a negative consequence immediately. What we're talking about here in terms of positive reinforcement, you can ignore maybe the occasional bad job, give them constructive criticism where appropriate, but you really want to be positive and give good reinforcement when they do the job well. Slide 37, you can motivate people by expanding their job capabilities. So if you go through a job rotation, Let's say you're in a manufacturing plant and you're only doing one type of job. You may get really bored with it. So we could rotate you for a period of time for maybe a quarter of the year. You do one task. We train you and have you do a different task for the rest of the time. Maybe shift you to a third job after a few more months. What this does is it has a mutual benefit because the employee may be happy to learn new skills. It keeps them interested. It also benefits the company because your employees now have learned new skills, so that if anybody calls in sick or retires or quits, you can be able to move people around because they know how to do more than one task. Job enlargement is adding more tasks to a job instead of treating each task separately. So I can give you more work for your current role without actually shifting you out to another job or rotating you out. You need to do this for employees that probably have the desire to be able to accept it and have been kind of targeted for growth. If you have a good employee, you want to give them a little bit more work to see if they're up for it. That's a good way to know if this is the type of person that you can promote. Job enrichment means that you're going to build in other motivational factors like job recognition and responsibility and advancement. You put that right into the job duties. So you can make job recognition part of the job. If you do a good job, you know what your consequences are going to be. That can lead to additional motivation as well. 38, we talk about flexibility. So in order to improve morale, I think we talked about this in class before. A lot of people in their 30s and 40s can be considered a sandwich generation. They may have young kids at home that they have to take care of, but they may also have aging parents that they have to take care of. That can lead to a lot of conflict with the job. It can lead to a lot of stress. If you offer flex time, meaning that you can let people work different hours, it may cater to their needs outside of work, which could lead to better productivity on the job. Let's say I have to bring my kids to school in the morning and I can't come in early. Maybe instead of working 9 to 5, I can work 10 to 6. Maybe someone else wants to pick up their kids at school after they get out. They come in at 6 and they leave at 2. They're both working 8 hours a day, and as long as the company is open during those hours, you should look into making sure if it's possible to give them that type of flexibility. One of the things that you need to do if you're doing flex time is to institute what is known as core hours. So if somebody comes in at 6 and leaves at 2, and someone comes in at 10 and leaves at 6, they're both there between the hours of 10 and 2, which could be your core time. So if they need to talk together, if they need to go to a staff meeting, they're both going to be available at the same time. Another way to provide some flexibility is through the compressed work week. Let's say I need Fridays off because that's just fits my schedule better. I need to take my parents to the doctor or something. If I can work 4 days, 10 hours a day and still work 40 hours, and the company's designed to be able to incorporate that and allow it, then that would be something that would be advantageous. By doing flex time and compressed work weeks, you may be able to attract employees that may otherwise not be able to work for you. And if they're good employees, that gives you an advantage over the competition if they do not offer the same type of flexibility. So slide 39 is just a more detail about what we just talked about. I kind of already went over this, but they talk about core time. They give you a little clock. You can figure that out. Slide 40 talks about job sharing. This is where you have a full-time job that could be split by 2 people working part-time. It sounds good. It's a little bit harder to pull off in practice, especially if the same job has certain requirements and one employee is doing a better job than the other. That could lead to some conflict. But job sharing can also be an effective way to avoid job layoffs. If you're having a recession, we've got 20 people working here and we need to lay off 2 people. If 2 people are willing to split one job, or 4 people are willing to split 2 jobs, that would mean that we wouldn't have to lay anybody off. They would feel more committed to the organization because they're capable of keeping their job, keep their paychecks coming in a bad time. And then when the economy picks up, it's a benefit to the company because they know that they have people that are skilled and already trained to be able to do the work. Slide 41 talks about the SAS family. I'm not going to go over that here, but you can read through it. There's a couple of links. I think they may discuss it in your book as well. Slide 42 simply talks about the importance of motivational strategies. If you have people with strong motivation, they're going to be loyal to the company, their productivity will increase. It can have factors in terms of pay, promotion, job design. If you're motivated by the nature of the relationships that you have, it's going to impact your organizational culture and make it a more positive place to work. And you will begin to get a reputation to be a good place to work. You probably have seen magazine articles that talk about the best places in Boston to work. These are the type of things that really contribute to that. And if you have to hire new employees and recruit new employees, quality employees, this can actually make it a lot easier for you to get an advantage over the competition. Slide 43 talks about economic environment. If you're in a recession, morale can drop because people are getting job cuts. If you do things like job sharing or try to limit your layoffs, that can increase morale. But if you have to lay people off, you may have people who are left behind that have to pick up the slack and work harder. So you're going to have to be attentive to their needs to make sure that you're not going to burn them out and lower their morale. So doing some of the other things, even if you have to do layoffs, if you give things like flex time and certain benefits and perks that don't really cost a lot of money in bad economic times, you can help keep the motivation high. Slide 44 simply talks about motivational strategies, and they give examples from different companies. I would advise you to read through that. I'm not going to go through it for the purposes of this presentation. And that is it for this chapter 9. We'll cover the next materials shortly. I hope to be able to do a class either live or we will do another one of these next time. It depends on accessibility to either WebEx or Zoom or something. I'm going to talk to the school and make sure that everybody in class has access to it. Thanks.